The Conservatarian Manifesto, written by our good friend Charles C.W. Cooke, who is nice enough to take some time out of his morning for us. Charles, good morning to you.
Good morning. I'm impressed that you played Sultans of Swing for my intro.
Well, we follow you on Twitter, Charles. We know what a Mark Knopfler fan you are, and we like to make our guests feel very comfortable as they enter our program.
Absolutely.
We'll be sending you a complimentary radio station-only disc of it later on.
Thank you.
What's the solo album Knopfler did, the Philadelphia album? That is really good.
Sailing to Philadelphia.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite records. I annoy my wife by listening to it. If I have a couple of drinks, that's my go-to record.
And we know a few things also about annoying our wives here on the program, too.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
We're all in the same boat. Charles, you've been very kind to us over the years with your time, and we're excited for you about the new book, which is coming out March 10th. It's called the Conservatarian Manifesto, Libertarians, Conservatives, and the Fight for the Right's Future. It's out March 10th, and we bring you on now because in the book business, we're told, pre-orders are a huge deal, and there's no reason why any of our listeners wouldn't want to buy your book anyway, so you might as well get it now. Tell us a little bit about the Conservatarian Manifesto.
Well, I should start by saying it's being called a manifesto and it's being read is a little bit of a joke, obviously. It's not a manifesto in the sense that a progressive would write a manifesto, in large part because my political argument is that America needs to return to a much more localist way of thinking. And in that way, you don't want to tell everybody how they should live. The idea came to me after many conversations with conservatives and libertarians and people in the middle who started to shy away from using the words that they would have in, say, the year 2000. I think after the Bush administration, the word conservative became complicated for many on the right. And you started to hear people say, well, when I'm around conservatives, I feel libertarian. Or when I'm around libertarians, I feel conservative. And some people would say, well, I'm a liberservative or I'm a conservatarian. And I wanted to know what this meant and why they were vexed and what the best way forward for the Republican Party, which really is the only vehicle for the American right in combining the two. And so really the book is three things in one. The first is a look at where we are and why people are dissatisfied. Why this idea of I'm not a conservative, I'm a conservatarian, or I'm not a conservative, I'm a libertarian has come from. Secondly, how the party can best accommodate the two factions, which, as I say, is in no small part to return power to the states and to limit federal involvement. And the third part is my suggestions for where the party should come down on many of these internecine fights, drugs, foreign policy, and immigration, where there really are substantive differences between the libertarians and the conservatives.
For the people out there who, you know, pay attention to these sorts of things, but I've got to believe that there's a few out there who are thinking, I don't know exactly where I fall. I've got a friend who claims to be a libertarian. I hear some of the ideas. I like that, but that might go a little too far or doesn't go far enough. How does a person go about determining where you yourself stand?
Well, I think one of the problems we have on the right is that the coverage of change within conservatism tends not to be written by conservatives. And so a shorthand example is this notion that, well, if conservatives were just to give up social issues, then they would start winning elections. This idea, as Jonah Goldberg would put it, that I'm a fiscal conservative, but I'm a social liberal. But really, not only is that too simplistic, what, for example, is a social issue? Can we really compare an issue such as gay marriage, which is about the way in which the state recognizes institutions in civil society, to the war on drugs, which is about which substances the state wishes to prevent human beings from trading and consuming and possessing, and abortion, which is about life and death. And my suggestion is, no, those things are not all the same, and also you're not going to get the same reactions from people If you say to a conservative, a staunch conservative who is staunchly against the legalization of marijuana, for example, look, you've lost this one. It's not going to go back in the way that you would like it to, but here is a candidate who agrees with you on pretty much everything else. It may upset them, but it's not the end of the world. They may be able to support that candidate. But on a question such as abortion, where it really is life and death, and those who are pro-life do not think you can compromise any more than you'd be able to compromise on the question of, say, genocide, it's not going to be easy for those people to give it up, and I think that's why abortion remains such a key issue. And so what I'm trying to do here is to present the fault lines within conservatism from the perspective of somebody who understands them, and then I offer my own views. Now, I would say I am a conservatarian, of course, in the way that I define it, but we can disagree. I'm sure people will disagree with me, for example, on immigration, where I think the conservatives have it more right, on foreign policy, where I think the conservatives have it more right, and on drugs, where I think the libertarians get it right, as I do with gay marriage, although gay marriage is complicated because there are also questions of conscience involved.
Charles C. W. Cooke with us. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. His new book, The Conservatarian Manifesto, on sale March 10th. Pre-order now at your favorite book location. You can also head to his website, Conservatarian.com. You get a signed nameplate if you order right now, too. Charles, you mentioned abortion. That's an issue that always pops up when I think about these fights and read and hear debates, too, good debates between libertarians and conservatives. I know some of the guys over at Reason.com and Nick Gillespie is pretty much on the opposite side of what would be considered a pro-life position. And as you mentioned, those are the kind of issues that really fracture the ability sometimes for people who agree on the other 90%, 95% even, to come together on the same page. That is such an issue where some libertarians and some conservatives have just diametrically opposed positions that are difficult to reconcile and are desperately important to them. How do you address that?
I think you don't. I think when it comes to the question of abortion, that is a rare example of an issue that cannot be split. The reality for the Republican Party and the conservative movement, however, is twofold. The first is that most people do not care about abortion to the exclusion of everything else. And the second point is that Republicans, conservatives, libertarians within Washington and within National Review and within radio stations such as yours think about politics in far more absolute terms and probably far more consistent terms than the average voter does. And if you are an average voter out there, outside of the bubble, outside of the Beltway, really you are prepared to make compromises on all sorts of policy. And those are the people that if the right is to win the future, that they will need to win. And so I think, it is possible to acknowledge that those two positions are compatible, that you cannot convince a pro-lifer that abortion is acceptable. Similarly, I am not going to convince Nick Gillespie on this question. Hopefully what I can do is to convince those who are more like Nick Gillespie that the general interest for him lies on the right, and that in other areas we can compromise.
You point out in what I'm looking at here that conservatarians applaud conservatives' efforts to protect Second Amendment rights, efforts that have been wildly successful recently, but they see the war on drugs as an unmitigated disaster that goes against everything conservatives ought to value. I've heard those viewpoints expressed exactly. I don't think that person knew they were a conservatarian.
No, possibly not. My view on this is that the drug war hurts conservatives because people consider their position hypocritical, and not without good reason. If you look at the way a conservative tends to respond to a mass shooting, and then you look at the way a conservative tends to respond to the question of drugs, they do seem almost incompatible. Now, in the immediate term, when you have one wing of the party, I'm talking young voters and libertarians, that is entirely happy to decriminalize marijuana, if not more. And another wing of the party that is dead set against it, you are going to have to find some way around it. And my suggestion is that you take Paul Ryan's position, which is to say, I acknowledge that you, as my voter, is against legal marijuana. Were I a Wisconsin state legislator, I would be against it too. But as a federal employee who wishes the bounds of the Constitution, who doesn't want to perpetuate what is a failed government policy, regardless of what one thinks of the morality, I wish to back off from Washington. So, it's more complicated in terms of immediate practical politics, but philosophically speaking, conservatives really should be the ones who are leading the charge, if not for repeal of the drug war, at least for reform, because it is the right that tends to take on government programs that become too expensive, that become destructive, that do not do what they are intended to do. And I think I can say with some confidence that whatever one's view of drugs per se, the notion that the drug war is achieving and can achieve its aims is risible.
Charles C.W. Cooke with us, the book, The Conservatarian Manifesto, Libertarians, Conservatives, and the Fight for the Right's Future. Pre-order now. It's on sale officially March 10th everywhere and at conservatarian.com. You've been in the U.S. for, about 6 years now? 5-6 years, I believe?
3.5.
3.5?
The first time I came on the radio in the United States, I think, was your show.
That's what we were talking about.
Right from the beginning.
Yeah, that was during the Occupy New York protests.
Right.
Okay, so it's only been 3.5. Okay. Question still stands, though. I know you were a student of U.S. politics while you were not here. Now you are among us, so to speak. Is your evaluation, is your prescription for conservatives and the conservative movement and conservatarianism different now than it would have been, say, 4 years ago that you've been here, and sort of do you have a different perspective on conservatives?
That's a fascinating question. I think it's changed in some ways purely because the country's changed. When I first arrived in the United States, gay marriage did not seem as much of an inevitability as it does now. The drug war was not as broadly criticized. It is now the case that a majority supports the legalization of marijuana. That was not true in 2011. So in terms of thinking about these questions, my views have changed. My general instinct toward the U.S. settlement has not changed since I arrived, although I've probably become slightly radicalized by the last 3.5 years of this president. And I talk about this in the book, and this is not only a criticism of Barack Obama, but of the presidency in general. One of the challenges that conservatives have before them if they do take back the White House, and indeed if they don't, is to rein in the executive branch. It will be extremely important for a President Walker or a President Rubio or whoever wins the election, if it's a Republican, to make it clear to the public what he can't do and to reverse this trend towards unilateralism. Now, 3.5 years ago, I would probably not have been as worried about that, because at that point, although Obama had just lost control of Congress, or at least the House, he hadn't yet tried to get around the constitutional order day in, day out. But we are reaching the apex of what has been a long climb towards imperialism within the executive branch. And if there's one thing that I am now far, far more worried about and concerned with than I was when I landed, it's that.
The Conservatarian Manifesto. You're going to want to grab this. You're going to want to pre-order it. You get the the signed desk plate. You're going to want that as well. You're going to want to follow Charles on Twitter and absorb everything that he writes, because you're going to learn a whole lot.
Yeah, and Charles, please come back with us around launch date. We'll play some more Mark Knopfler for you, okay?
I'd love to. Thank you.